I'm excited to be here. Thank you. What amazing collective consciousness here. I've been in hundreds of Unity churches, and you have something very, very special here. Besides, I'm serious. The sense of community is amazing, the love that people have here, and what an amazing voice. You feel, that's enough to expand your consciousness, which is what I think Reverend Duke does. He helps people expand their consciousness. And Reverend Sandra, the same way. She's my good buddy. Sometimes I help her with a healing class. And if you haven't had a chance to attend the healing class, it also expands your consciousness really nicely. So today we're going to be talking about miracles. And scientists hate the idea of miracles. That's because when a miracle happens, it breaks a law of nature. But the truth of the matter is, miracles happen all the time in quantum physics. Let me give you some examples. We know an object can't be in two different places at the same time, right? Wrong. If an electron is circling an atom and nobody's watching it, it miraculously turns into energy waves. So it's everywhere at the same time. Here's a big one. Einstein's law of relativity. The pillar upon which that law rests is nothing can go faster than the speed of light. Well, in 2031, 1931, two very famous, time and space have no meaning. So, two very famous physicists by the name of Schrödinger and Heidelberg proposed a theory called quantum entanglement. Quantum entanglement is, if you have a couple electrons circling an atom, they become magically entangled, which means beyond time-space limitations. So even if they were separated by 1 trillion miles, if you pushed on one, the other would instantaneously go in the exact same direction. In fact, so instantaneously, they'd be communicating faster than the speed of light. Einstein hated this theory. At one point, he called it spooky action at a distance. Well, in 1981, Einstein was proven wrong. And then in, I think it was 2013, in the new cyclotron in Switzerland, they did the experiment again. And they found that not only did the two electrons communicate faster than the speed of light, it was 10,000 times faster. If you're going to break a law of nature, you might as well go all the way. But the spookiest thing in physics is the idea that consciousness itself is the quantum field. Consciousness. Now, this is one of those woo-woo things, but I think this is the right audience for it. But it's also might be a little confusing. If you get a little confused, you haven't seen the movie, What the Bleep, then don't worry about it. I'm going to try to use some analogies to explain it. We're not going to spend much time here because we've got some more interesting things to go into. But in the movie, What the Bleep, they were shooting little balls of electrons through a slit, and they were lining up in the back wall. And there was an eye watching. As long as the eye was watching, the little balls stayed balls. But as soon as the eye went away, there was no more balls, and there was 12 lines on the back wall. So what happened? How could one line turn into 12 lines? Well, what happened was this. They discovered a very interesting fact, I should say, that without consciousness, everything is energy. So you need consciousness to collapse energy waves into particles. And so what's happening when everything is energy, they interfere with each other. The little waves of energy interfere. That's why you had 12 lines on the back wall. It's kind of like dropping a couple pebbles in a pond. It produces waves. Those waves interfere with each other, produce more waves. Pretty soon you have 12 waves. That's exactly what they found. So what does this mean? It means that consciousness is the ultimate creative force of the universe. That consciousness is the quantum field. Now, personally, I think that physics discovered God. Who is the consciousness that's collapsing energy waves into particles? Because without particles, you can't have people, you can't have stars, you can't have a universe. Interesting. Now, here's the other part of this equation. We have consciousness. Is our consciousness the same as the consciousness that created this whole universe? And there's been well over 1,000 studies that prove that our consciousness is indeed the same. I usually like to categorize it in about 4 or 5 different groups of studies. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them here. The first one is the prayer research, which, by the way, Unity Church has been an active participant in. And one of the reasons I like Unity Church so much is they believed in their message so much so that they subjected it to scientific scrutiny by doing prayer research studies. The second group is the research that I did. And that's the research that shows that a group of people meditating can actually change the crime rates and auto accidents and suicides of the cities they surround. In other words, what we do inside can actually change the outside world. This is huge, especially today. And thirdly, the last group is a group that we can know things before they happen. So we'll start with the prayer research. Now, the prayer research, as we all know, back in the 1980s, they'd pray for one ward of the hospital. They wouldn't pray for the surrounding wards. And the ward they pray for would get well faster, have less need for antibiotics, have better quality of life, a whole bunch of other parameters. In some cases, less deaths than the surrounding wards. Now, most scientists poo-pooed this early research on prayer. They said that what was really happening was that people doing the praying happened to pick the ward of the hospital that had the best doctors and the best nurses. And of course, they were really, really good at picking out the best ward, the best doctors and best nurses in the one ward of the hospital. So this went on for a little while until 1988, where the first double-blind study was done on prayer. Well, double-blind is where it's a Cadillac version of prayer research. You pray for one group, you don't pray for the other group, but they're interspaced throughout the hospital, and so nobody can say it's all in one ward that has a better doctor and better nurses. And guess what? All those research studies came out significant as well. Over 250 of them. So finally, scientists said, okay, there's something to prayer. But what prayer really is positive thinking. Now think about it. We all know the value of positive thinking. You can't be coming to this church and not know the value of positive thinking. But is prayer just positive thinking, or is it something else? Interesting question. There was a study done here in Kansas City, by the way. And guess who was involved with that study? Unity Church. And what they did is they did a triple-blind study. Now, what's a triple-blind study? Well, a triple-blind study means that the person you're praying for doesn't know they're being prayed for. So let's say I'm sick, and Reverend Sandra's praying for me, and I get well faster because she's praying for me. But she doesn't tell me. If she doesn't tell me, then I can have no positive thoughts about it because I don't know that she's praying for me, right? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, good. Because they did a whole study like this. Over 1,200 people in one of the hospitals right downtown here. Half were prayed for and half weren't prayed for over a 6-month period. And guess what? The same results as the other prayer research. In other words, prayer isn't just positive thinking, it's something else. Now, this blew a lot of people's minds. What is prayer? So they did another triple-blind study out in Columbia, New York. And what they did there, they had 2 interesting twists to this study. The first of all, people in Columbia were praying for people in Korea. So somehow the prayers had to go through molten rock and whatever else in the middle of the world and arrive at the right person in Korea. And the second interesting thing was it was a women's in vitro fertilization clinic. Women trying to get pregnant. And again, the women didn't know they were being prayed for. And guess what? The women who were being prayed for had a 50% greater chance of getting pregnant than the women who weren't being prayed for. Pretty amazing. It brings up a whole new dimension to the idea of immaculate conception, but we won't touch that one here. So, but here's the spookiest thing about prayer. There is no electromagnetic field or energy emanating from our brain that can account for these amazing results. In fact, the electromagnetic field in our brains don't basically get past our skull bones. So how can praying for somebody 100 feet away, much less thousands of miles away, work? It's one of those spooky action at a distance kinds of things that Einstein was complaining about. It's a quantum thing. It's a quantum thing. We're going to come into my research here. This will kind of explain it a little bit differently. which is the research that those of you who saw the movie What the Bleep know that we took 4,000 transcendental meditators into Washington, D.C. and actually changed the crime rates while we were there. Now, I had a life-after-death experience way back in India when I was on a quest to find God. And I was told to do research to prove that we're all connected, that our collective consciousness, doing stuff inside, can change the outside world. This is way back. And so I went and got my PhD and did the research back in the 1980s, showing that groups of people meditating could actually change the outside world. And they were all connected. And so what we did in this study, we'd already done 20 of these studies. So it was quite reliable. And we decided to prove to the world that we could change the crime rates in Washington, D.C. This is right after President Clinton had been elected. And we waltzed into Washington, D.C. with over 4,000 transcendental meditators. And we announced before we did this, we actually announced it to the whole world. We met with Marion Barry. Marion Barry was the guy that was arrested on cocaine, but he was clean then. And we talked with the police chief. We told everybody what we were going to do. That's how sure we were it would work. And if it didn't work, they would have poo-pooed all of our other research. So when we went there, we kind of would meet in a big, huge ballroom every morning about 8 o'clock. And we'd meditate till about 1. Then we'd take a break for a couple hours, come back about 3. And then we'd stay there till about 7. Now, people always ask me, how did you do it? How did you do it? Certainly, you must have been thinking about crimes. You can't reduce crimes without thinking about them, right? How can you reduce crimes without thinking about them? Well, the truth of the matter is, we never once thought about crimes. Never. We simply got out of the way and let the divine flow through us. Got out of the way. So we surrendered the results. Guess where that quote's from? Charles Filmer, one of the co-founders of Unity Church. Surrender the results. Away all this intention stuff. Surrender the results. Because when you want something, you're attracting lack. You don't have it. You're coming from a place of lack. You attract who you are, not what you want. So what we did is we got out of the way. And also, you can't get to the quantum by trying to get there. Even though it's everywhere, you can't get there by trying. You have to slip into it. It's one of the ultimate dilemmas. The quantum is everywhere, but it's hard to get to. Or actually, it's easy to get to, just to give up. That's the answer. Surrender the results. Now, the last group of research studies is even a little bit more far out. This one was a study on psychic abilities done about 12 years ago. And they were trying to find out if people could guess in advance which kind of photograph would come up on a TV screen. So everybody participating in this study was in front of a TV screen. And every 8 seconds, a new photograph would come up on the screen. And the photograph was one of 2 different types, a positive type or a negative type. The positive was people in nature scenes. The negative one, however, was very gruesome, people in morgues. And unfortunately, the experiment found that there was no significance. But, lucky for us, that was not the end of the story. Because the researchers decided to hook people up to something called the GSR machine, similar to a lie detector. It measures anxiety in your body. And what they anticipated was there'd be a spike of anxiety every time the negative photo was showed on the screen. Well, guess what? There was a spike of anxiety, but it happened before the negative photo showed up on the screen and not before the positive one. In other words, our body knew it was going to happen before it happened. Remember the old adage, I knew it in my gut? There's a lot of truth to that. Of course, nobody believed the results, so they redid the experiment in another laboratory. In fact, it was in Europe. They figured in Europe maybe they have a better laboratory. And guess what? Same results. Then they looked inside the MRIs to see what's happening in the brain. And they found the whole brain would light up about 4 seconds before the negative photo was presented. So we know what's going to happen before it happens. Now, nobody did anything with this research for about 10 years. 2 years ago, a very famous psychologist by the name of Dr. Bem, and I've done a lot of psychology classes. In fact, I've taught here at KU. And I can tell you he's in every textbook. He's well known. And he decided to revisit it. He did the experiment 10 times. 9 of them came out significant. The chances of that happening by sheer chance alone is 1 in 4 billion, which means it's highly reliable and highly significant. And so he submitted it to the Journal of Social Psychology, one of the more conservative journals, but he decided to go, hey, why not? They decided to publish it. But the editors, who are all psychologists, said, we don't know what's going on here. This is Dr. Bem, he's world famous. The only reason we're printing this is because he did it, because obviously he must have made a mistake. We just can't find it. They said, I mean, how can you know things if they're going to happen before it happens? That doesn't make any sense. Personally, I think it's a great situation going in psychology right now because they're finally coming into the age of the quantum where there are no time-space boundaries. We're beyond time-space. Okay, so kind of in summary, I have 5 major conclusions. And what we've done is we've kind of outlined that there is indeed a quantum field, and it creates the universe through consciousness. It collapses energy waves into particles. And this creative source is inside of us, kind of like the unity concept of co-creator. However, we can make some really amazing conclusions based on the science. And the first one is life after death. Think about it. If our consciousness is not brain-based, if it's quantum-based, then when the brain dies, our consciousness doesn't have to die. There's a part of our consciousness that still lives. This is huge. This is a huge quest for mankind and womankind, is to find life after death, to know that we continue on. This is huge. The second major conclusion, this is a big one for a lot of people trying to manifest their dreams. The subconscious is now the key. Deepak Chopra and Bruce Lipton both said, unless we can clear out the subconscious blocks, then we won't be able to get very far. And the reason for this is obvious. We now know that consciousness creates realities, but so does our subconscious create realities. So if we have doubts and fears in our subconscious, which means we're not aware of them, that would hold us back. So that I've talked to so many people who feel like they take one step forward and they're taking one step back at the same time. That's because of the subconscious. And it's not your fault. These are old brain pathways that are in your brain. They can be cleared now. So that's the second conclusion. The third conclusion is we're all connected. We're all connected. Because if we do stuff in here and it influences the outside world, either through prayer or through meditation, both of the studies that we talked about was about 150, about 200, 300 studies, then what it means is somehow we're able to interact with the outside world by simply changing ourselves. If you want to get rid of World War III, you've got to stop the war in your head. So, Jill Bolte Taylor, very famous neuroscientist from Harvard, had a stroke that shut down her left hemisphere. Instead of being in agony, she was in ecstasy. She had the traditional mystical experience. And what she said, aside from the fact that she was in bliss from meeting God and all that stuff, she said, for the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. We're not alone. We're connected. That was one of the themes of Wednesday night talk. Reverend Sandra brought that up in her talk. Several other people did. It was amazing. We're all connected. And fourthly, together we can make a bigger difference than we can alone. We come together and we meditate together in this amazing church. Not only are we helping ourselves, we're helping out the world. And it's working. Just the other day, I saw a poll on gay marriage. 65% of people in America are now for gay marriage. 2.5 years ago, 65 are against. There's been a shift in the collective consciousness. It wasn't done through politics. It wasn't done through negative thoughts. It was done through the change. People coming together and meditate like this amazing group here did just today. It's amazing. We have the power. We're not helpless. First of all, turn off the television. That's the first thing you can do. So, because addicting, it's all that negative stuff is addicting. So, but we can do it. That's the main message I want to leave with you today, is we can do it. And lastly, but not least, everybody in here at one point or another has doubts. Everybody. It is so refreshing to be living in a time when science is disproving the doubts, is proving spirituality. It's perhaps the most exciting time that I've ever been around, because science is leading the way. This is an exciting time to be alive. And it's not just based on faith, it's based on facts. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.